Welcome everyone to another round of Talgo Conversations. This session is brought to you by Talgo Executive Education. The vision is to make people around the world success ready, and Talgo does this by helping people reinvent themselves through upskilling and reskilling online certification programs. We have with us today four prominent thought leaders. Okay, may I request people to please be on mute so that we can. I still see some people on, with their audios being unmuted. Thank you so much. We have with us four prominent thought leaders today, and let me quickly introduce them to you. We'll start with Dr. Ankita Singh. Ankita, glad you could make it here. Pleasure to be chatting up with you again after our last session. Ankita is Senior Vice President and Global of Human Resources at Signix Datamatics, but that doesn't even begin to define who Ankita is. Ankita, I have lost track of how many awards you won, so I'm just going to mention a few of them. She's been rated amongst Forbes India's top 100 great people managers. I think that was the most recent one. She's also been awarded with the CHR of the Year award in 2020, 19, 18, and 17, along with the Women Personality of the Year 2019. And there is a whole list of them out there. So Ankita's expertise includes transformational change and M&A initiatives, among other things. Ankita, welcome, and really happy that you could make it here today. Next, I'd like to introduce Mahesh Telang. Mahesh, we've known each other for a while. Mahesh currently is the Group Head of Talent and Learning for Al Rajhi Bank. Al Rajhi Bank is the largest Islamic bank in the world and one of the most prominent banks in the Middle Eastern area. Mahesh has more than 27 years of experience, and he spent this experience across banking, consulting, technology, and various other functions. Mahesh has been on the business side, on the product side, and now for almost 2 decades, he's been a very, very key player in the talent space as well. Prior to Al Rajhi Bank, he was with Standard Chartered, and at Standard Chartered, again, Mahesh was heading talent management pan globe. Mahesh, very happy that you could make it. I know there was a time difference, and glad that you were able to flex to accommodate this. Welcome aboard. Sriram, okay, so I've known Sriram when he was at D Shaw. Sriram is currently Director Human Capital at Arcesium India Private Limited. Prior to this, he was heading the human resources function at D Shaw India. And Sriram has about 23 years of professional experience, 13 of which has been spent as serving as head of human resources. Again, somebody who comes with a very, very diverse background, and I'm hoping we'll be able to get in a slightly different skew to what we are going to be discussing here today. Welcome, Sriram. Glad that you could make it. Oh, Vijay, I've kept you for the end because you are going to be the go-to person for me whenever we want to have a contrarian view to what our friends from human resources are going to be talking about. And that should give our viewers a bit of a clue. Vijay is not a HR person, but then in his last role as managing director of Navi General Insurance, formerly DHFL General Insurance, Vijay was the CEO and managing director there, and I'm guessing there was a very close collaboration happening with human resources as well. Prior to the CEO function that Vijay was hemming, Vijay has also been a business head, a sales head in various organizations. He's worked with Bajaj Allianz Life. He's worked with Tata AIG. And of course, as I mentioned, his last role was with Coco, Navi General Insurance, formerly DHFL General Insurance. So we have with us four very, very prominent thought leaders, and I am really looking forward to this conversation with all of you. Welcome aboard, gentlemen, and Ankita. So the way I'm structuring this conversation is I'm going to be throwing some generic questions at all of you, and then there might be some specific questions for specific panelists. So my first question is more generic, and feel free to respond to it as you wish. Vijay, I'll come to you in a bit. This question is for the other three panelists. We keep hearing about HR practitioners talking about aligning talent strategies with business imperatives. My question is, how often do you actually see this happening? Okay, this might be a great time to actually unmute yourself. Yeah, Mahesh.
All right. If I could probably give it a try. The simple answer to this, your question is, I think it's more often than not, right? Because most organizations these days it's less of a choice with given current reality and all the things that are happening around us. But when I see it in my experience, most times you see this alignment happening in the context of business transformation agenda, right? Whether it could be growth related or it could be recovery related, irrespective, right? But I've seen that happening. So the good news is, yes, it's happening. It's a reality. Most organizations today have it because they don't have a choice. But it's been done in the context of. So making it more, if you were to make it more systemic, right? That's where the question is. How many organizations make it more systemic for it to kind of sustain? And I do have some experiences around that. Some good, some bad, of course. But then probably happy to share. And one thing that has worked, if I might say, is creating a kind of a formal environment, right, where you have the business leadership engaged with the HR team, the talent learning HR team, and create a kind of a forum. We used to call it a talent council, and then which later got expanded to talent and learning council, where our CEO used to be the chair for such a council, and then you had all the business heads, the global business heads, being part of that council. Worked beautifully because not only drives alignment that you're talking about, because everything starts with a conversation of why do we need it, right? It starts with the business as a reference point and the needs of the business. But it also helps, in my experience, effective implementation of the talent strategies or agendas, irrespective of which one you want to drive, because most organizations struggle. It's good, looks good on paper, but then when you go to implementation, you generally have a challenge in terms of implementing. So I think that's where I would stop for now.
So Mahesh, I just want to drill down a little deeper. I love this concept about the talent council, and I know I've been privileged from an outside perspective to some of that, at least what's happening in at your current organization. But tell me, when you mention challenges, what are the couple of key challenges that one would come up against?
Challenges pertaining to the alignment?
That's right.
I think the biggest, and that's why I said there are some good learnings that have come through over the years, I would say. One of that is this disconnect, and the reason I said this formal forum is because if you don't have a cohesive kind of a group sitting on the same table, then you end up having individual engagements, some of which might work, and then you bring in personalities, then you bring in individual business priorities, right? So you may not get a cohesive kind of a one voice or one intent, because one of the advantage of the council used to be that that once you decide on an agenda, once you decide the priorities, and you get an agreement, then I think it's runs smoothly because you have a buy-in from all the key stakeholders that you need. So I think that's an advantage. So one of the challenge that we faced was disconnect, but I think it was overcome, and that's where this forum kind of got formalized actually. And thanks to, I must say, another thing is the sponsorship from the highest level. And I think Vijay out here has been a CEO, and I would like to hear from him. But in my experience with the hero earlier, the CEO or the sponsorship from the topmost level, the CHR or the CEO, is extremely important, right, to be able to kind of drive this.
So what I hear you saying, Mahesh, is as long as there's alignment amongst all the key stakeholders, right? And we are looking at one vision, we are looking at a commonality of intent being there, and backed by powerful sponsorship across, the key stakeholders. That should, to a large extent, aim at mitigating some of the challenges that one might otherwise face in the alignment. Great point there. Before I move on, would any of the other panelists have a different view or an alternate view?
I can take a stab at it. So,
Sure.
see, I think my view is that change always happens. It's just that at some points it's more, and some points it's less. So, from a external perspective, sometimes you're able to see the drastic, kind of initiatives a little more easily compared to kind of what's kind of going on. Because as long as there is growth happening, there is a business, kind of is going through some evolution. And in our case, we've established our CCM about 5 years back. So we then had to get out of the captive mode, get into a startup kind of a mode. From there, we moved into, slightly more stable but growing kind of environment. And obviously, all of these have required us to actually adapt and do different things. Our talent pool strategy has changed. Our performance management strategy has changed. Our learning strategy has changed. And as I mentioned, some of them are a little more drastic. We implemented OKR, which is a little more drastic. Whereas in the learning space, it is more gradual. We kind of moved into more online added platforms, made it more on demand. So some of them are more gradual. So I think that's the whole thing. I think change happens. Sometimes we adapt to it quickly. Sometimes it's a little more slower. But as long as the business is evolving and there is change in the environment, there's certainly change in what we do as well.
Sriram, I am going to come back to you a little later to ask about what performance management, what changes to the performance management strategies, have happened, especially those that you wish to talk about during the course of this session. But I guess I'll do that a little later. Want to hear from Ankita what she has to say about the alignment between the two.
Thanks, Jagmohan. I think Mahesh and Sriram, they have covered it really well. And, probably earlier days, we used to talk about alignment, but those things were not in action. But today, we actually see that, talent management is all about putting the right people in the right job, and how closely this relationship is demonstrated between a better talent and better business performance. So it's quite evident. Earlier, where we used to talk only about HR processes or people processes, now, as Mahesh also pointed out, we are talking more about leadership practices, employee engagement, knowledge accountability. So things have shifted to a better place where we have better vision and mission for employee management or talent management. And I think it will further change, because earlier we had a very restricted life cycle of an employee. It used to start with joining, then talent management. In between used to be very short. You just have to ensure that performance management is happening on time, and training is probably happening on time, and then there was a gracious exit. But now in between, you see so many things, which is like, be it motivation or development or retention or succession planning. They have further subcategories, and it has extensively expanded when we talk about the strategic move. So it is changing. People have realized probably, obviously, there was always a worth of talent management in the system, but now there is much more focus looking at the current scenario. And thanks to technology, it has gone up to the next level, and it will further keep changing, as Sriram also mentioned.
Ankita, somewhere down the line, I am going to come back to you with a question in terms of how you see technology having enabled greater alignment between the business and talent piece. In case I missed that out, feel free to kind of prompt me on that one. But that's something that I'm very, very excited about. Vijay, over to you. You've been on the business side. You've been, you in your role as CEO and MD. I'm guessing there was a lot of collaboration with human resources. What has your experience been in both of those functions? One, whilst you were, let's say, heading sales in the organization, and then when you moved in as CEO, how have you seen the relationship between talent practices and business outcomes shift based on those two functions of yours?
Thanks, Jagmohan. I think I come from an industry where none of you have worked, so you must have heard it from the outside. So let me give a perspective of the insurance industry. I have been largely associated with the life insurance industry. I was CEO for a general insurance company. In the life insurance industry, the product category itself is something which is seldom sought by any customers to be bought. It is always sold. And therefore, the pressure of sales on the salespeople is tremendously high. And this pressure requires to be reduced, and the only way it can be reduced is through continuous development of the salespeople. It's one of the highest attrition industries, and I don't know whether you have data for attrition in the insurance sales verticals. It is as high as sometimes 120%. I've seen attrition levels going up to 120%, and I have seen attrition levels at the very best of 60 to 70%. So it ranges between 60 to 120%. And when you are having people who are coming in and going out, at me, there's a door in front and there's a door in back. Talent strategies really become a challenge. And from that perspective, a lot depends upon how the sales management personnel are geared up to take care of the salespeople so that the attrition reduces and the sales pressure does not absolutely burst people at the seams. However, I have a contrarian view in terms of how the talent strategies have weaved in with the sales architecture of an insurance industry, and how they have done it with the non-sales people. It's absolutely diametrically opposite. So when you look at the sales side, I have found that mostly the talent development or talent destruction strategies, as I would call it, have been left to the business teams and the business heads. And I think the intervention from HR from that perspective has been minimalistic. And at the same time, when it comes to the soft skills, the softer side of the insurance industry, which was servicing, which was operations, I found that the talent strategies were absolutely in sync with the requirements of the respective teams. But on the sales side, I still feel the vacuum exists in the insurance industry, and the talent strategies of the insurance industry, you can imagine 70% is sales. If 70% is sales, there is a lot of scope for talent strategies and HR to be partnering sales to somewhat a different extent than what they are doing, because we just can't leave it to the destruction mechanism which is currently being.
So Vijay, I'm going to stop you here for a while. Mahesh, you've been in banking for a very long time, and you've headed sales teams, and then on the talent side as well. What has your experience been with this equation that Vijay just brought up? Let's talk about the sales teams and how the talent pieces fitted in there. Do you agree with Vijay, or do you have a contrarian view?
I was going to jump in anyway before you invited me because sales has been close to my heart. I mean, a large portion of me does have that the sales elements in it. I would agree with Vijay, but put it in context. One is that organizations have different models, right? And over a period of time, things have evolved. Some have evolved more than others because of the need that's required, and I think it's industry specific as well. So, since I don't come from the insurance industry, I may not be able to talk about it. But then, let me talk from a sales perspective. Sales as a function is dynamic, right? And as Vijay said, I would struggle to think of organizations who don't have a fairly high in the 20s kind of a attrition level in the sales on the sales side. And sometimes some organizations look at that as good because, in my experience, when you look at fresh blood coming into the system, I think it kind of helps keep the things moving. Having said that, I would say that organizations, and in say, for example, in the banking, which is more kind of a traditional models, we have had, people from sales, from a progression point of view, while you might not focus so much at the grassroots level, but at the middle management and the senior management level, there's clearly a focus around the talent strategy. And I have, in my experience, including myself, people have moved across from those levels, either cross-functionally, so that it kind of helps their career, or sometimes vertically as well. So it depends, I would say. Partly agree with Vijay, but it's probably could be done more consciously by organizations, and I have known organizations which do that consciously, because you still have limited resources. You still have to prioritize your resources into areas that are really going to have the maximum impact. So it could be a combination of various factors for that matter.
Thanks, Mahesh. For a moment, I thought you were going to be, you were going on the diplomatic bandwagon there, but then I see you made your point. And while I understand that to a large extent, at least this part of the discussion has still centered around insurance and banking and financial services, but I'm guessing towards the latter part, what you were talking about is it may not necessarily be restricted to BFSI. You have seen this happening in other places as well.
Absolutely.
Right. Sriram, I'm going to throw this one at you. You ask different HR practitioners what their concept of strategic talent management is. And depending on where that person has spent more of their initial years in, you will find there is a skew in the response. It's almost like putting an elephant in a room and having 5 blind men there, and everybody has a different perspective, right? So let me ask you and Ankita, before I move on to the others, how would you classify strategic talent management to your mind? What are the 2 or 3 key things that come to your mind, or when we say that, or when we use that term?
Okay, see, I think it's quite simple. One is just aligning the people organization to the evolving business needs. Okay, that's largely the summary of what it is. Now, for example, we were a captive. We, kind of went into a rapid growth phase and a startup kind of a thing to a slightly more evolved growth phase now. So, and the products have changed, the talent needs have changed. So it's about being, kind of nimble enough to kind of go with what business requires and to be able to make those changes. And I think one of the things is also to be able to make decisions with a slightly more medium to long-term kind of perspective, while at the same time considering data, considering employee sentiment as well as the environment. I think as long as you keep these in perspective, and that's really the alignment that we are talking about over here. If the environment is changing, you can't sit and say, no, I only done this for 10 years, I'll not change, right? If your attrition is going through the roof because there's a competitor out there, you have to evolve. You have to, kind of quickly react to it. Or, and if you feel that your employee sentiment is dipping, there has to be a change that you have to kind of do. So I think that's the thing: data, sentiment, environment, and then making decisions with a slightly more medium to long-termish. Medium term, I think. Long term is still, things change too quickly these days. But the tendency sometimes is to go short term. I think if you want to really be strategic, I think you just need to look beyond the immediate requirements and then keep pace with what business needs. That
so what I hear you saying, Sriram, is market sensing, which means have an eye on what's really happening out there in the external environment as well. market relating, which is pull back what you have seen happening and how that relates to you, your organization, different businesses. So a mix of market sensing and market relating, which would be your environmental scanning process.
Right.
And then drawing a fine balance between what is tactical, what is immediately important, but having your eye also on the ball in the long term.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And merging it with what Mahesh had said earlier, if you can involve key stakeholders in this process, it's a recipe for a much more effective piece happening out there. Ankita, same question to you. What are your feelings around strategic talent management in the context of the discussion?
So, Jagmohan, I probably would be elaborating on what Sriram said because he almost covered all the perspectives. But yes, I mean, you talked about stakeholders, you research, you redefine, you define, you reset your system with respect to your organization as well as individual goals. So when we talk about internal communication or accountability, or do you have right skills for the right requirements? Are these things properly aligned? Are your dots well connected? Are you able to measure it and adapt and evolve as per the need of the system as well as the external market? I think for that would be strategic talent management for me, where you have clarity about the organization, you have clarity about the external factors, all stakeholders, and at the same time these two factors are well connected with what your employee is hired for and what his or her expectations are. So when these things are very well connected, you have your strategic implementation already done for talent management.
Makes sense. That's cogent. That's really cogent. Vijay, as somebody who's led led the organization and been on top of all the functions, what would your expectation have been? What are two things that you would have expected, the talent team to do to move in the direction that you would want business outcomes to happen? What is that alignment that you would have looked for?
I think this is an area where I've had a very positive experience in my role as a CEO, because at Coco was possibly the first insurtech insurance company set up in India, where the entire sales process was digital, and the strategic talent, which was commonly found to be an insurance industry, would be sales and actuarial. But when it came to my new company, the strategic talent was different. It was the digital resources. And if you look at insurance industry, digitization is mostly outsourced. But for us, it was in-house because our strategy was to be an insurtech player. So one of the key responsibilities for both me and my HR head was to identify these key digital talents who are working on our platform and whom we could not afford to lose, and what was the best way, because you can understand that in the IT industry, especially with talents on the AI, artificial intelligence, and digitalization front, there is huge demand, and losing those people is very easy. So this was a challenge for my HR head, and I'm sure she came out trumps on this, because we were able to retain the talent which we wanted to till the tenure I was there as the CEO. And one of the things which we did was to make sure that continuous education and nominating them and keeping them engaged with education programs which will further enhance their AI and other skills and the latest skills. And that was one thing which helped us retain those people, apart from the common retention bonuses plans which is there available in almost every company. So this is an area where I have had a positive experience in my last assignment, and as a CEO, we did manage to retain the critical digital team, and even till date, I understand they're still with the company.
So what I hear you saying is retention of critical talent mass. That was a key imperative from your perspective, at least in the previous organization. Okay, that makes sense. I want to bring up a theme here now, which I mean, we can talk about it for actually the next 10 days, but unfortunately, we'll have very little time for that. But I still feel it's so woven into what we are talking about today. Culture. Mahesh, where does culture fit into this entire piece? You're in mute, Mahesh.
Sorry about that. I think culture is a critical aspect, right? And when you look at culture, I think it's very important because culture is used in different perspectives. So let's put this culture in context. Ultimately, culture is about all those many behaviors that you're trying to drive across, right, in an organization, which cumulatively lead to an effect, which is the culture that you're trying to drive. When it comes down to culture, and if I'm using culture in the context of the talent, strategic talent management and building in that, I think it's a extremely important aspect. But let me put it across in the most simplistic way. If I were to, and I'm referring to what Ankita said and Sriram said as well earlier, while on one side you need to kind of ensure that you need to have right alignment with the current and future strategy. You also need to look at your past experiences and learning. But in the most simplistic way, if you were to really bring about a culture, you need to have some grounded practices that actually help build that culture over a period of time. And to me, I would just say it in 4 simple buckets. I mean, in my experience, and I can, if you have time, I can share more details around that. But when you look at this talent piece, it actually falls into 4 buckets. One is, in the most simplistic way, what talent do we really need? And I think that's where Sriram was talking about, saying that as long as you're quite clear in terms of what business outcomes you're trying to drive, what's the strategy, whether short-term, long-term, that you're trying to drive, what competencies do you require for people to be able to help drive that? Or as Vijay mentioned, the critical roles, right? Having understanding of the critical roles and which are those roles that are going to make or break your business or help you kind of succeed going forward. So I think that understanding of what talent you need is the first bucket. The second one is you need to also be conscious about what talent do you have. And I think from a culture perspective, I think there are some practices that need to be really embedded out there, like things like assessing who your talent is. A lot of organizations might do it in different ways, but depending on the kind of depth of your practice, whether it is performance assessment, whether it is talent assessment, whether it is leadership assessment, behavior assessment, right? So understanding who your core talent and the practices associated with that, running that across your performance is the most critical, and I think Sriram alluded to that, and you're getting back to him on that as well. But that's one of these practices are a critical part of the second bucket to understand what talent do we have. And the third one is, what's the gap? So you know what you need, you know what you have, and there you come up with what are the gaps? And that's where all your pipeline and succession, bench strength and all these pieces come into play. Where if you don't have a core practice of being able to assess your successes against your critical roles, then you're impacting the sustainability of the organization. So you need to kind of make sure those practices are embedded as well. And then finally, the fourth bucket, which is how do you address these gaps, right? And again, a part of building that culture is around what kind of practices do you have in place or do you want to put in place to be able to kind of deliver on that or address that gap. Like things like, the decisions around buy or build, like you have 2 CHROs sitting out here, right? Very clearly in terms of looking at what kind of strategies you want to buy in terms of your talent acquisition, what kind of strategies you want to have around your development, around if you were to build that, what's your strategic workforce planning, is that really happening as a part of the organization's DNA? I think these are, and then of course the surrounding pieces around retention and development, all these pieces come into play. But in summary, if you were to look at each of these four simple buckets, the level and the depth of the practices, talent practices that you have embedded, I think that will define the kind of culture that you bring into play. So if you want to kind of make sure that your performance management is right, you need to make sure your line managers, your leaders, actually exhibit those behaviors that support that particular performance management priorities.
So Mahesh, taking off from there, I want to put this question to Sriram. Sriram, you spoke about changes in performance management a while ago. Um, uh, uh, how has the cultural construct at Arcesium, played out in this context?
Okay, all right. So culture is very interesting because for me, I think it's a key differentiator. And before I answer the performance management bit, I think it kind of your competitors can replicate many things that you have. They can replicate your policies, your comp models, your infrastructure, replicate culture. It's very, very difficult. And it's about how you make people feel. And that's where it's different. I mean, so it's not that, you can't, because many people have to, imbibe that and demonstrate that for somebody to feel good about it. And we are talking about thousands of people feeling good. That means that, it needs to be imbibed and demonstrated. And that's not easy. That cannot be replicated in a day. It takes a long time. It is top down. It is driven by the values. It's driven by the policies. For example, a lot of our cultural things are demonstrated by our policies also. We have like a flat thing where everybody has the same entitlements. My associate who joins a fresh can fly business class. The director also flies business class. Absolutely no difference in policies. Openness in communication, where anything that we publish, anybody can comment on it without any restrictions. So those are when we say openness, when we say, kind of we care for you or we respect you, we have a unlimited sick leave policy. Okay, we have no dress code. So when you look at all these things, right, they are the demonstration of your culture, where you stick by, and it's not that, some abuse does not happen. It does happen. Okay, but we deal with it and say that it's more important for us to propagate this culture. And hence, that's how we've kind of think. But by that, we kind of communicate that we trust you. We respect you for being a professional. And that's, I think, my take on culture. See, with respect to performance management, we've kind of moved from a goal-driven thing to a OKR kind of a model. And there were two reasons for that. One was, I think we wanted everything to be in alignment so that people have clarity of why I'm doing this. What's the big deal about what I'm doing? How is it making a difference? Okay, and that alignment, became much clearer when we did the OKR model. But the second, and the linkage to performance management, so that OKR model is completely driven by business. Okay, and the reason for that was that we didn't want people to be limited in their goals, because when you put it as a goal and it's part of your performance system, people are very cagey about what they put, its record and things like that. So when we separated the two and we said the business will drive your objectives, and hence you could have anything. You could have like a moonshot objective over there where you will hit maybe about 20% of it, but your performance record will say that you did. And only when you differentiate it, then people, kind of see that thing. If it's part of my performance record, then I'm worried, oh, I just hit 20%. Is that an issue? Okay. And this is where the openness to that kind of change, the ability of the organization to open up its entire objectives, are all elements of the culture, which kind of get demonstrated by it. And it's also the ability of us to trust employees, because the OKR is a more kind of visible model. Everybody can see everybody's OKR. I mean, the goals thing, we couldn't do it because, it is all secret. Nobody would share anything. And it was like, okay, I don't know how much this person achieved. Here, none of that nonsense is there. Everything is open. Okay, it gets updated on a regular basis, but it doesn't reflect your performance record. Performance is determined by a manager who then looks at what you've done with the OKR, then looks at, what your, other contributions were. And then it gets created in a separate, kind of form.
It's also interesting, Sriram, that the OKR model, for that to really function well within an organization, the culture of that organization needs to be very, very aligned to that. And OKR is way more ambitious and aggressive in a lot of ways than your typical KPI model, right? So it's not that you can just decide one day that, okay, now we are going to go with an OKR model and plant it, randomly within the organization. The culture needs to be very supportive.
Jagmohan, the issue is that if you don't have the right culture, the resistance at different levels becomes too difficult to handle, including your senior people, right? And even here, we had some resistance. It was not like a completely smooth thing. We had to sell it at some levels. We had to do a little bit of, kind of hard sell at certain businesses because, it took that effort. But it was still, we were able to get it done because of the existing kind of culture that we had. Otherwise, it becomes too difficult because, if you just push it top down, people will say, okay, let's do it. But then you don't imbibe the spirit of it. And then you kind of limit it.
Ankita, for you, I have a slightly different question. Where does employee engagement fit in when we are talking about aligning talent strategies with business? What has your experience been with employee engagement in that sense?
I think employee engagement per se is omnipresent. It's everywhere in the system, be it your talent management, your business strategies, because employee engagement, as many times we misunderstand it as keeping employees probably just happy with those events and fun events. It's way different. So if you get up in the morning and you want to go to work and you want to contribute, that's employee engagement. So once you are right there in the organization, you have entered your office and you know that this is my task and probably I'll be able to perform really well because I have been enabled well, I have been trained well, my KPIs, KRAs are clearly defined and communicated. That's employee engagement. At the same time, when you talk good about organization, or the purpose and objective of organization and the individual are very much aligned, or when you feel loyal about the organization, and you can be a brand ambassador for the organization, these all small things probably put together will talk about employee engagement. And when we go a little deeper in these sub points, probably we will understand how directly it impacts your talent management and at the same time business of the organization. So this is all very much interlinked, and that's why I initially said when we talk about going digital, virtual now these days, it has further enhanced importance of employee engagement, and that's how the connection is more visible, that if you take care of employee engagement at the right time in the right manner, it is definitely directly going to impact all other aspects, and where the talent management tops the chart, that becomes the priority.
So, simple question for the entire panel, and you can decide who wants to pick this one up. How do we move the organization from thank God it's Friday to thank God it's Monday? In other words, how do you excite people to come to work every day, every week of the year? Because to my mind, if you can do that, there are only two situations. Either they're still at home and therefore, they want to come to work, or the environment is just so challenging and exciting that, they feel great coming into work every day. So how do you get people there then?
So Jagmohan, my take, sure, Sriram, go ahead because I've already covered the first part.
Okay. So, see, I think there are, for me, it is one, make people feel important. Second, make them feel good about, where they are and what, in terms of the treatment that you offer them, and challenge them. If you're able to do these three simple things, okay, which is treat everybody as if that they're important, give them that respect that they deserve, and give them challenging work. Okay, I think that's the crux of what really drives people. If you are able to fix these things in the end, and it's different for every individual. That's the point where it's difficult to fix, right? Because there is somebody who's at the top of your performance chart, somebody who's at the middle, and somebody who's at the lower end of it. And so how do you really deal with that entire mix? And how do you now restructure your jobs to be able to cater to that as a thing? How do you be respectful in your dealing of, say, performers who are not at the peak levels, and yet get them to actually reciprocate on the feedback? So I think those are some of the elements I think we need to fix to be able to get them to really think about that point.
Vijay, insurance is one of the industries where high performance is a very, very aggressive requirement, right? High performance culture is something which, irrespective of the industry or the sector, people in any case talk about. Question for you. How do you drive high performance culture without losing sight of the individual? So a high performance culture, a lot of times erroneously, assumes that you cannot have performance without compromising the individual. And we've seen that happening in a lot of organizations, right? How do you fix that balance? How do you ensure that you can build high performance culture and yet be respectful of the employee?
I'll just go back to my experience of how the insurance sector has evolved over the last 15 years, especially since opening of the sector. And from that perspective, if you look at goal setting, the goal setting exercise, what Sriram was talking about, the OKR method, the insurance industry is far away from that. It is still in the primitive, individual employees setting their goals, their managers approving it, and no one actually knowing as to whose goals are what. And ultimately, when they get their appraisal ratings, most of them are dissatisfied because they felt that the goal was not made by them and their performance was also not judged with transparency. So what we try to do at COCO is to slightly change this and have a method of goal setting where goal setting was not left to the functional heads. It was not left to the HR head. It was left to a cross-functional team which would sit and decide the functional goals and link it to the company goals. And when I say link it to the company goals weightages in the insurance industry has ranged from 5 to 10% most of the time. And here the employees came up with a solution that the company goal should be at least 40 to 50% of each employee's individual goals. And the entire company's goal should be known to every employee, and then they should build as to what they need to contribute towards that goal. That should be a part of their functional goal. And therefore, the functional goals became so intertwined with each other. There was no alternative but to work with each other because they had made the goals such that they got married very badly to each other. And the end result was that if there was a product development exercise, it was left to the actuarial team generally in the insurance industry. The actuarial team will develop a product, will suddenly come out. But what happened was that when the product development exercise started, every department people started volunteering to give their product ideas. And we had to set up cross-functional teams for product development, which was again not just actuarial underwriting, they were observers. And ultimately, what we came out with were products which the employees felt they had made, they had contributed. And that is something in the culture which I find was a very big change from most of the way the industry works, which I have seen at COCO. And that is what makes the employees glued to the company. It also makes them very free and independent. And in terms of giving their opinion, it is very open. So would be the most junior employee who would walk to me and say, sir, there is a product which we are developing. I've given this idea, but no one is listening to me. So I wanted you to listen to me. I think this will work. That is the kind of culture you need to set up, where anyone can walk into anyone and give their suggestion, and it would be heard and most probably implemented if worth implementing. That's something which we have tried to strive at, and it has worked better than it has worked in the previous organizations.
Okay. Ankita, you had a wide range of experience, again, in different areas. One of the challenges which most organizations and HR and business practitioners face is the ability to prioritize leadership behaviors. So those leadership behaviors that really matter, which have a high impact on the organizational output. In your experience, what are some of the best practices you observed there? How do organizations prioritize that kind of leadership behavior?
So I think again, it's all about alignment and your vision and mission that you have drafted for the company as well as for employees. I think in our, if at all, I talk particularly about my organization. Um, we have to formalize a kind of guideline which even leaders follow, just to ensure that the culture of the organization or the need of the organization is maintained and it remains intact. So, like few of us have already talked about it. When we talk about generalizing something, and I can read no audio. Audio is not there in the chat box, Jagmohan.
I wonder why. Mahesh, you're able to hear?
Yeah, very clearly.
We can hear you.
We can
I think
hear
it's
you.
participants, they are not able to hear. Neha says it's audible.
Okay, so I'm seeing people saying it's audible. In case it is not audible, ladies and gentlemen, may I request you to refresh, do a control F5. Okay, it seems to be working well now. The universe is being kind to us. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, so I was saying that leadership team, they have to realize, we all have to realize level that it's more individual approach than a generalized approach. We have to create a system which is more like a growth engine than probably just letting or getting the work done. The communication channel has to be very clear. As Vijay mentioned, there should be no differentiation. Like Sriram also mentioned, when you get into that culture where everybody is treated equally, when everybody is treated individually, when there is no comparison, but because you have been hired for your individual skill sets, you came in as a differentiator, and that should be maintained throughout. That's the most basic leadership capability that we have to you have to come up with, where we start treating organization mission vision definitely at one side, but at the same time the drivers have to be treated individually, ensuring that we are becoming growth engine for individuals. We are not comparing them, we are enabling them well, so that they are able to contribute. And when we keep talking about the bigger picture in our communication channels, when we say that this is the bigger picture, are you able to share that bigger picture with each individual? We generally are in a habit of just sending out a mail or probably just discussing it in our open houses, but are you able to give a space in your bigger picture to each individual? Are they very clear that what they have been hired for, how they can contribute? So
Sure.
that kind of very basic thing is required at the leadership level. Rest, I am sure the broader perspective is always very well taken care of.
Thanks, Ankita. I remember asking you to prompt me on the tech part, so I'm going to go there before we open up questions to the audience. Mahesh, a lot of digital transformation stuff happening in organizations you've been a part of. Ankita, Ditto in your case, Sriram. The nature of your business is such that there is a lot of tech involvement, and whether you were talking about insurtech and so on. So my question, open one to all of you, is how has tech enablement impacted the alignment between business imperatives and talent strategies? Do you see this having hampered it? Oh God, no. Or do you see this having been an enabling force? What is your experience collectively?
Mahesh, you would want to go first?
I would say I think the answer lies in the question itself, Jagmohan. The technology, and I think we have people out here like Sriram who are very much and Ankita as well, who are very much into that on the technology side of things. But when I look at it from a different industry and what technology has had an impact on banking, for example. If you look at the fintech agenda that's currently happening, I think that's a game changer for all. I think it's a matter of survival. So partly technology that comes in, one from a broader organization and industry point of view. I think there again is a matter of survival rather than first before you talk about the growth and the strategy. So will it help? Yes, it does. It is absolutely critical. When it comes down to where the difference is the pace at which you're trying to bring that technology and the pieces in. I think that's one thing, and trying to align with what is the need of the future. I think that's where the biggest prize is. So from a technology perspective, yes, definitely every organization. I'd struggle to think any organization that's really would not be focusing on looking at ways and means to bring in technology to enhance either their processes or bring in new products or services that will actually help deliver the needs of the future, the needs of the customers. Having said that, the only thing I would want to add out here is that one thing I've seen, that we have seen technology even in the past that has come in sometimes, but then it doesn't really stick, and sometimes it does fail. So the only thing in my experience what I would say is, when you bring in technology, organizations need to be conscious that sometimes you have to bring in technology that augment the current practices and enhance that, rather than bring in a technology to install a practice. And I've seen that when it's the later, you have seen organizations where technology has failed because the practice just doesn't stick, right? And you've seen that within HR, you've seen that within business, multiply. So I think that's the one that I would end with out here, saying that when you bring in technology, be conscious of ensuring that the practice exists, or to bring in technology to enhance that, to take you to the next level.
Makes a lot of sense, Mahesh. I think that's a great point there. Sriram, you wanted to say something?
See, I think in the technology world, change just keeps happening all the time. So there is no question of whether you don't have a choice really. So it's so quick, because today you have something, there's somebody else who can build something, and you can you don't know where your competition is going to come from. And even in our case, most of it is on cloud. We've gone modular. We've kind of made our product more kind of modular and things like that. So I think just from a environment perspective, you need to be nimble. There is absolutely no choice over there, because and there are so many not only new technologies coming up, but players who are able to kind of compete with you with much simpler things like that. So when you have a legacy and you're trying to manage that, tomorrow somebody can come with something much kind of simple. And even if I look at the HR technology, right, now what's happening in my view is that some of your traditional players like your SAPs and all that success factors, they're all becoming your base systems. But even in our case, what's happening is we're building much smaller niche pieces for different things. For OKR, we bought a product called BetterWorks. Okay, though SAP has its own performance management, this is much simpler to use, and it kind of integrates well with it. as a thing. So for LMS, we're doing something similar for exits. So it's like that the fact is that, there's so much choice out there that you're already constantly evolving with, what you do. Certain things, for stability system, but on top of that, now the thought process also is, okay, we'll take it, let's use it for a few years. After that, if things change, and these are not very expensive things or not very heavy things to, to be able to change quickly. So that's really on the business side, there's no choice, it's kind of changing. But even on the HR side, we are seeing that there are many more options than what we were used to, maybe even about 5 years back as a thing. And that's really the changing thought process that I can see.
Yes, so first thing first, I think software does not equal talent management. So definitely it has proved to be an enabler, because today we are talking about data all the time. And when we talk particularly about HR or other business enabling functions, we have seen the transformation happening. Earlier it was transactional, then in definitions we saw it's transformational, and then we moved to strategic. Probably technology has enabled us to actually be a strategic partner when we talk about business. So something which is humanly possible, but at the same time can be taken care by technology, that has moved on to technology, and that's probably the best move, and most of the organizations are moving towards it. But when we talk about softer skills or something which is only humanly possible at this point in time, when we want to be a little intuitive, we have data in place, but we still want to understand a person, when we want to understand business, when we want to relate it, when we want to be a little more predictive, when we want to empathize with employees, when we actually want to be human of the human resource, obviously your personal aspect or humans will play a critical role. But keeping that aside, I think 80% of what we have been doing in past is really well managed by the or with the help of technology. And that's the reason the 20%, which was so critical, probably the most important phase or part of all our profiles, which was a strategic part of it, we are able to handle it really well, and all thanks to technology. At least in my view or the experience that I have gone through, this is what I have to quote.
What I hear you saying is a blend of high tech, high touch, and use technology more as an enabler of talent practices. Okay. Before we open up to questions from the audience, a one-line response from each of the panelists. What is it that you would want to leave when it comes to, the thought behind aligning talent strategies in business? A one-liner response from each of the panelists. So let's start with Vijay.
I think my one-liner would be the best way for talent strategies to work in an organization is for the talent and the people in the organization to believe that HR is the friend of the employee and HR is not the friend of the company. I think that's something.
Well said, Vijay. Well said. Powerful statement there. Powerful statement. Sriram.
I think my take would be keep it flexible and adaptable, and be willing to change. I think that would be the simple thing, because sometimes we get stuck in the ways that we've kind of done that. So if you're flexible and you're willing to evaluate things as they are and be willing to, kind of make changes, that's the best way to go forward.
And I heard you say nimble a lot of times during the conversation. That just ties in there. Totally with you on that, Sriram. I think that's just so important. A great point there. Ankita?
I would say keep the right balance. Take care of your people while you are definitely taking care of business, because they both have to go hand in hand. I mean, they cannot be an imbalance in between.
So if your employees are not happy, you will not have happy customers either, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
They so rightly say, you take care of your employees and they take care of your business.
Sure.
Probably that's the
Makes
truth.
sense. Makes sense. Mahesh?
I would just to add, I completely agree with all my panelists. But only thing I would say is, in addition to that, is keep focus on the business lens, because when you, and I think that starts with what Vijay said in terms of people trusting HR. If HR looks at it from a business lens, then all the HR practices, including talent that we are speaking about naturally will fall in line, or will be aligned, and the outcome will be collective. So I think that sponsorship, that trust, that collaboration that you require will naturally come in if HR were to just keep that business lens as the starting point, and then everything else, because there are a huge amount of good practices and work that HR teams do in terms of in support of delivering the outcomes for the business. So, yeah.
Thanks, Mahesh. Thank you so much. Okay, it's that time of the day when we want to go to questions from the audience. I've had some questions being forwarded to me on my phone because it gets difficult to scroll on the public chat. So in no particular order, and my apologies if I'm starting from somewhere else. One of the questions that's come up, and anyone can take it up. What should be the organizational design for talent acquisition practices in order to deliver better outcomes for the organization? So I guess in brief, how does your talent acquisition strategy enable better business outcomes? So I guess it's something relevant to
yeah.
Okay.
So see, I'm not sure if I'm really answering the question, but I'll try and take a shot. I think the idea is to be open to try different talent models. For example, when as we were going through our journey, I think at some point we wanted to be able to expand the talent pool, and then so we started looking at different profiles, like, for example, from MBA premium colleges to a MBA of a kind of regular institute to even graduates as a thing. But what it also required us to do was to change the job profile and of what was existing, so that these kind of profiles could kind of manage that. And it also helped because, one, we had a larger talent pool to access. Our cost optimization was much better. Our ability to hire quickly was thing. But it was not just a talent strategy in terms of talent acquisition strategy. It was also business strategy, because business had to change the roles and to be able to accommodate the fact that we could bring in different types of talent. And so I think that's the way, when business is ready to try a different model, for us to be able to support it. And when we suggest something to business, for business to be able to deal with that and make changes. I think that's the right balance for talent acquisition strategies to work.
Again, goes back to all the stuff that all of you have been saying. There has to be trust within the system for people to do that. As Mahesh said earlier, stakeholders need to be banding together, talking to each other, collaborating, taking decisions which have an impact on the organization, but need to be sieved through different functions. But yeah, you're so right. It's not just a talent acquisition strategy. They might be implementing it, but it's something which is evolving out of a much larger discussion. I think that's a great point there. Okay, another question that we have is from, and by the way, a majority of the audience comes from the HR fraternity. I recognize some names, so I know some of these are senior HR leaders. Some of these are talent heads elsewhere. So we have a lovely audience out there. One of the questions that's coming up is, how does talent management strategy change or evolve post-COVID? I was kind of expecting this one. Nobody had spoken about COVID till now. So does it change at all? Or if it does, how does it change? Who wants to pick that one up? Okay, Ankita, you want to go for it?
Okay, let Ankita take it. How does that? Yeah. Good, Ankita.
I think basic foundation remains same. It's linked to business. The recruitment strategy, acquisition strategy remains same. I think major change post COVID, or which we can already see now, it is digital. So where more we were relying more on individual one-to-one meetings. We were able to connect with so many people. We were able to do things differently. Now it's going to be more digital. Everything, probably your social media, your interviewing skills, your panel discussions, your like KPI and job descriptions that you share, that you talk about, what you actually look for in an individual or in a candidate is also going to change. Because earlier we knew that we are talking more about physical collaboration when you are right in the office. Now you are hiring people who would be, again, probably without even having a physical joining, they will just join virtually, and they'll sit somewhere back at home, and they'll have to connect, collaborate with everybody who's new in the team. So in a way, foundation remains same, but rest, everything changes in recruitment. And I think that's one department which is gonna evolve in a different avatar altogether.
And I guess, Ankita, not just at a recruitment point of view, right from recruitment, onboarding,
Every
the entire process, if you look at it, and learning for that matter, learning getting virtualized to such a great degree. Okay.
Okay, just what I'm just going to add on that. I think
Yes.
what COVID has done is basically it's increased our choice from what we used to do in a particular way to now knowing that another way also works. And so it's going to give me a choice of doing mix and match, of saying that when I want to do recruitment physically because of certain reasons, I have the option to do it. When I feel that it's going to be effective enough in a virtual setting, I have the option to do it. Okay. And obviously, in the virtual model, our cost equations are more efficient. So then there is a necessity for us to not leave out this learning of what we've had, but to really see where we can use it, but without diluting some of the things. Like, for example, employee engagement. There is certainly some element of thing which happens when there's a physical connect. Okay, so we don't want to lose that out as a thing. So some of the things that we are considering is to do a hybrid model, that where we can do virtual effectively, we will try to use virtual. Okay, largely we will still stick to what our objectives of engagement are, objectives of hiring are as a thing. Even from a seating angle, we are, for example, thinking of only 80% being in office at any point in time and remaining 20% working from home on a rotational basis as a thing. So that we have both, that we don't want 20% to completely work from home all the time, but really to rotate it, but thereby optimizing on real estate, optimizing on space and things like that. So certainly, I think we have more choice. I think that's the end of it. And we will now mix and match, which gives us, a most efficient, even say options, right? We could hire people with disability. Earlier, that was a difficult thing to do. Now, if people are going to work out of home, that gives us options. So many more options have opened up.
So what we're really saying, I mean, the way I'm looking at it is it's really not a pre-COVID, during COVID, or post-COVID kind of a situation. It's at the end of the day, it's about adapting. It's about being nimble enough to recognize what is the need, what are the compulsions, and then being able to rapidly evolve to that situation. And having adapted, figure out which model works best. And some of these models are working better today, but then again, some of these might change tomorrow. So as you rightly said earlier, it is about being nimble and having an eye on what's happening and being able to adapt quickly. Okay. Mahesh, there's a question for you. In current times, when you put together teams, do you purposefully include members with a broad range of perspectives and backgrounds? Actually, any of the HR people could answer this. In current times, when you put together teams, do you purposefully include members with a broad range of perspective and background?
I'll give it a shot, but it's a much broader question, so I'll try and restrict it to only a few perspectives. One is, I think diversity is of essence, right, today. In fact, what we were just talking about in terms of what Sriram was talking about, the ways of working being changed is giving us more options to actually access much wider talent pools, right? Which would mean that you have access to much wider talent pools with diverse talent, with different capabilities. So I think giving the opportunity that has come, needless to say, I think you will have teams that will have a much better mix of diverse talent. And obviously you've seen that when when you leverage diversity, right, you actually are trying to enable innovation, agility, which are actually the most critical aspects that organizations require today to be able to kind of go forward.
Okay. Mahesh, there's another one which is there for you, but let me come back to you on that one. There is a question for Vijay. Vijay, in your experience, how has identification and development of potential talent worked for the organization, given the significant attrition rate that you spoke about?
Frankly speaking, on the sales side, at the lower middle management level and at the lower management level, there has hardly been any effort of talent retention in the insurance industry. So I don't want to speak about it as an achievement. It's something which a lot of work needs to be done, because I think what has happened on the talent side is on the middle management and the upper middle management levels, where a lot of effort has been made for building talent. And you would see a lot of companies, especially where I have worked, where a lot of growth has happened from within the industry and from within the company as well. So while there was a phase when in the first 5 years after opening of the sector, there was a lot of recruitment happening from outside the industry, now you will find that entry into insurance industry from other industries has diminished quite a lot, and there is a lot of talent available within the industry. So whether it is between companies, within the company, if you have a role which needs to be filled, you don't have to generally see outside. There is talent available. There is a lot of work which has been done to ensure that the talent is available within the, especially on key specific departments which are very exclusive to insurance, like actuarial and underwriting. You will find that the talent availability within the industry, within the company is drastically improved.
Yeah, thanks, Vijay. That's helpful. Okay, I see a familiar name. I'm wondering if it's the same person. I've not been in contact for a very long time. There's a question from one of the people in the audience, Raj Mahadev. Do organizations prefer getting fresh talent rather than upskilling existing talent, because it might require more time and effort? Mahesh, I think that question is addressed to you there.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. Thanks, Raj. I'll refer to what I mentioned earlier in terms of these 4 buckets, and when you come down to addressing the talent gap, there is a critical decision that most organizations end up looking at is whether to buy or build. Right now, when you look at buy, and that balance is very important, because when you do have existing talent that you need to kind of make sure that you build further, definitely, because you want to leverage their capabilities and capacity as you have it. So needless to say, the development strategy will address that need of the build piece. In terms of buy, that's interesting, because a couple of things are happening. I would mention 2 of them in this context. One, as we said, the access to a much wider pool of talent has become now available, given the different ways of working. And that is a huge opportunity for most organizations. So geographies don't matter, places don't matter. I think what matters is the core capabilities that you require, competencies that you require to deliver on a particular job. And I've seen this in context of banking. When you look at fintech or even data optimization, you have huge amount of these areas which banking traditionally did not have those skill sets, right? So those skill sets, there is no way that we would even attempt to build. But if you were to build, you may not have the core capabilities or take more time. So the natural choice is buy. And I think that's where most organizations are focusing on differencing between what to buy, what to build. And if you're buying it, while you will buy those when you say buy, I might also use the word borrow, because your ways of working again has changed. So, but when you buy, you also are conscious that you try and have your talent strategy in place, so that you're building successors, so that you're building those capabilities within the organizations going forward. So I don't know, Raj, whether it helped the question that you had.
No, I think it does, Mahesh. At least I'm quite clear on that one. Thank you so much. Okay, there's a question for Ankita and Shriram. Ankita, I'm posing this one to you first. Is it safe to say once a talent, always a talent? How do we tackle redundancy and regressive behavior? Okay, that's an interesting one.
Interesting one, actually. So yes, once a talent, always a talent. If that talent is ready to adopt and change with the changing time, if at all that talent is ready to stay relevant as per the time. So if talent is upgrading, definitely talent remains talent forever. If at all we stop at a point and we start feeling that we are best and we always remain best from HR perspective, from organization perspective, or from individual perspective, definitely it won't fly. So that's my take on it.
And I think that's plain common sense too. I mean, irrespective of whether it's corporate or it's life in general, if you're not evolving, you are, you know, somewhere life's gonna catch up with you. So I thought you said it beautifully. You need to stay relevant.
Okay,
Yeah,
let
I
me
just
just
wanted
add.
to add one thing because many a times we try and do different things and we claim that we have become expert in that particular field. But again, I would want to repeat that word relevant. Probably you are doing a lot of things, you are upgrading yourself, but is it done in the right direction? Is it as per the market need? And that's really critical. That will only define and categorize you as the required talent.
Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense, Ankita. Shriram, you were saying something
So
before I
I'll
move on to the
focus
next one.
on the tackle bit. The relevancy is very, very critical, as Ankita said. But on the tackling bit, what can we do? I think that's the more important question, right? First, I think is to make people aware of where they are, because sometimes you hit a competency, kind of cap, and you need to be aware that you've hit that place, and that comes either in the form of feedback or also the form of expectations being clear as a thing. Sometimes, when with leadership, feedback and expectation setting is quite poor. Okay, we tend to kind of shirk off, and then find that okay, they're not doing well. But really, when it's at a lower level, you don't have those things. That the managers are far more clearer in their expectations and what is what the output is. But when it comes to leaders, I've seen that there is a little bit of a tendency to be vague. So I think the first thing is to make somebody aware through feedback mechanisms, through kind of a proper kind of model where they're aware that saying, hey, this is the expectation and this is where you are as a thing. So now once that has happened, then you give them the opportunity to evolve. Okay, maybe they've hit a competency gap, and then you give them the opportunity to say, hey, we need you to change, we need you to adapt. Okay, and we are prepared to kind of coach you, or we're prepared to kind of give you some time to kind of do that. Now then it's up to the individual. At that stage, if they continue to say, no, I am not willing to change, I'm going to be the way I am, now then you can't do much about it, right? Then the exit is on the cards as a thing.
Yeah.
But really, I think this is the tackling, that sometimes they are not aware well and early enough, and they're not clear of what it is, and they don't have a kind of method to be able to change. When you offer them these, many people will change, some will not, and people who change then continue to evolve. People who don't then look at exit.
So if I were to relate it to the typical sigmoid curve, what we are saying is, whilst you are still on your growth stage, you might want to figure out, whether there is a opportunity to reinvent yourself. When you get into maturity, that's when you really need to ask yourself some tough questions. If the individual is not doing it, the organization can actually help the individual figure that out through coaching, through feedback exercises. And if that happens, great, you end up surfing the sigmoid, or else you fall into decline. So same thing works for individuals as well as for organizations and products. I think very well said there, Shriram. I still have about 45 questions. I know we're not going to be able to take this, so I just want to tell the audience that when we put up the video of this on LinkedIn and other social media, we will also put up the additional questions there, and you are welcome to go there and ask more questions and look at the responses. There is time for one more question, and I leave it to the panelists to decide who would like to answer this. What are some of the commonalities and differences in talent strategy alignment with business? Not necessarily in this part of the world, could be across different parts, could be other parts of Asia, could be the Western world. So repeating the question, commonalities and differences in talent strategy aligning with business. Any one of you could pick that up.
Jagmohan, I'll probably give it a shot. Given the fact that I've seen some of these talent practices being delivered or framed across in a few other geographies as well. So I think, and I would try and make it short in the interest of time, that a lot depends, and we spoke about culture, right? A lot depends in terms of the culture that exists, either within the organization or within a particular geography at large. The only difference I say, so differences in short answer to the question is there are differences very clearly, and the reason could be these cultural differences within the organizational geographies. The difference is that what does the organization or the organizations involved, what is their intent? If there is a real intent and a progressive mindset to be able to make a difference and make things different, then yes, you could probably have those practices being delivered. And I've seen that in my experience as well. So a lot depends in terms of the organization, the stakeholders, the individuals, and the value that actually you're trying to bring in, because it just doesn't, it's not because you have HR usually get branded that way, saying that sometimes practices are put in place without a very clear outcome that you're trying to drive that links up to the organization's vision or the strategy as such. So as long as that is being taken care of, the cultural differences will kind of diminish. You could have a more commonality in practices across places.
Thanks, Mahesh. And with that, I'd like to get into the concluding part of this discussion. Thank you very much, Ankita, Mahesh, Sriram, Vijay, for your presence and for the insights. Some of these have been insights for me as well, and so it's been lovely hearing from you. I guess while it's impossible to summarize all of this, it's been a long discussion, but I would say some things would stand out, and these are simple things that one could follow. Remaining nimble, remaining flexible, collaborating with stakeholders, identifying what are the changes that are happening, which means having an eye beyond the organization as well and beyond your business, and seeing how those changes relate to you and your organization. The keenness to adapt to those changes, keenness to continue learning, adapting to technological trends, and seeing which one of those could add more value to the changing paradigm between talent and business alignment. So a lot of things which have come up, and I think food for thought, a lot of thought. As I said, we will be putting up a recording of this session on YouTube as well as on social media channels. Since most of the viewers would be on the mailing list, we will share that across with you. And you're free to ask more questions and come up with your feedback. Ankita, Mahesh, Sriram, Vijay, once again, thanks a ton for being here. It has been a pleasure moderating all of you. Thank you so much for all the learning.